So I'm now joined by Kate Raworth. She's an economist from Oxford University's Environmental Change Institution, and she's also the author of Donut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. And I'm with Clare Farrell. She's the co-founder of environmental campaign group Extinction Rebellion.
Hi there.
How are you doing, Kate? So, Kate, how would you define a green recovery?
It's a move out of this emergency towards an economy that actually enables humanity to thrive on planet Earth. I know I'm putting that in big terms, but I think it's really important to step back from the 24/7 news cycle, the Chancellor saying this, the Prime Minister saying that. We can get so caught in the tiny details. We live on the only known habitable living planet in the universe. It's extraordinary. And we understand more than we ever knew before. In the last 10 years, Earth system scientists have drawn up what they recognize as Earth's life supporting systems. We didn't know this before. No generation before us knew this, right? So they realized that we depend upon this stable climate, protective ozone layer, fertile soils, the web of life, and that we must bring our pressures massively, rapidly back within it. And I say this because it means that all the economic theories of the last century and the governmental policies and the business models that were all designed for the last century won't solve this. They won't get us there. We need to come up with really transformative policies and visions of our own time. So what we need to look for right now is not going to look like anything that we've seen before, because this is a new understanding and a new goal that we've got to move towards.
And what do you think that looks like then? What is the ideal 21st century economy?
So we've inherited economies that are degenerative by design. Our industries and the 20th century industries we've inherited, they basically take Earth's materials, make them into stuff, use it for a while and throw it away. And that's a kind of take, make, use, lose. It cuts against the cycles of life. We endlessly run down the sources of timber, the mountains, the minerals, the fish stocks, and we throw our waste again and again into lakes and rivers and into the atmosphere. We need to turn that linear and degenerative economy into a regenerative one that works with and within the cycles of the living world. And that means we need to recognize that the waste from every process becomes food for the next one. So it turns from a line into a circle. Now, that sounds abstract, but what it means at the level of, say, a city is that when you're building buildings, you need building regulations that say, well, of course, the materials you're using need to be used again and again. So don't glue and cement that building shut. Clip it and bolt it so that when that building's life is finished, it can be unclipped and unbolted. And there's a depot where we can store those materials and everyone knows where they are. And we can use them and rebuild new things. So it becomes much more like Lego, literally Lego life. And that's actually a really creative and job-creating economy.
I mean, do you think that the solution to this is that, people have a moral awakening and they decide to consume less? Or do you think it's that we basically need to transform our economy in a way that the things that are better, more productive, more useful are the things that are also more sustainable? So, electric cars are just better than petrol cars. It's not that people are choosing an electric car because they really want to help the environment. Can we rely on that moral kind of reasoning?
So you know what? I think once we get fossil fuels out of our life, out of our noses and out of our lungs, we will look back with astonishment that we thought it was normal. I mean, if you walk now into a shop or a pub or a restaurant in a country where smoking has not been banned, most people, certainly from the UK, think, oh, God, this air is choking. And yet that was normal. So we are so used to having our lungs filled with the fumes of fossil fuels every day. We hardly taste it and smell it. We will look back with delight and say, why did it take us so long to get rid of that horrible, horrible liquid that destroys living beings? So I think we will so prefer it when it's gone. But I think, you said, is it a moral awakening? No, it's an ecological awakening. I think every child in school learns about the human body, right? They learn that we have 2 lungs and a heart and that our well-being lies in balance. We need enough food, but not too much, and enough exercise, but not too much, even enough oxygen, but not too much. We need to take what we teach every single child about human health and teach them about planetary health. Every kid should have the right to understand that this living planet on which we depend needs to thrive in balance. And the idea that our politicians should go on the TV and talk about growth and growth and growth, endless growth, every kid should think, hang on a minute, nothing in nature grows forever. Anything that tries to grow forever destroys itself or the system on which it depends. And when we see endless growth in our bodies, we know that's cancer. So why would I listen to a politician who tells me that our economy is going to succeed by growing forever? I hope the next generation of kids will understand intuitively that we have to grow and then grow up.
But I think most people would recognise that the planet is incredibly important and it should be, saved and cared for. I think in reality, is it not just that it is more convenient for them to do the things that are damaging, to get to that future of free from fossil fuels where the air smells nice and we realise the kind of error we made? That's quite a hard transition, isn't it? Unless the things that we are choosing to buy and use are actually just more efficient and more useful and more enjoyable to use, and they're also free from fossil fuels, as opposed to just hoping that people will then realise that one day in the future life will be better. Is that not quite a hard thing for humanity to do?
Well, I think those things that we buy have to be made. We have to have regulations that make it easier and cheaper and more desirable to buy the right things and to get these toxins and life-destroying chemicals out of our food systems. So yes, of course, it's nice to have a living planet, but by the way, it's not just a nice to have, and that's the problem. I think we compare transformation and, do I really want to make that change and can we afford it? We compare it with sort of just more of the same. We ain't going to get more of the same. This living planet is our lungs. It is our food. It is our home. It's our everything. We are part of the nature that we're destroying. And as Leo and Libby were just saying, if we don't transform, we're on track for an utterly devastating future that none of us want to pass on to our kids, let alone have our kids turn around and say, you were the generation that allowed this. No one wants to be that generation. We have to recognize our utter dependence upon the integrity of this living planet. And it sounds kind of extreme that I'm saying this, but it's so basic and we don't teach it enough and we don't understand it. And our politicians talk about the economy as if it's something else. And the environment's this kind of nice to have fluffy thing on the side. It isn't. It's the heart and lungs and the everything of our home.
Yeah, I don't think it actually does sound extreme. I think it's just how we get there, I suppose. And I'm going to bring in Clare Farrell now. So Clare, you're the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. We've actually met quite a few times. We made a document. I filmed you for a documentary. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Ben. Nice to speak to you again.
Yeah, I think I've asked you this question many times over the course of making BBC documentaries. But what do you think the future looks like? How do we get to a place free from fossil fuels and a sustainable future where everything is okay?
Well, I think one of the key things is for me right now is to quickly endorse citizen-led solutions and participatory democratic processes, which, as our third demand for citizens' assemblies, would make possible political choices which our current system quite simply, isn't able to make. The lobbying system that's in place and the vested interests and the corruption and, quite honestly, the sort of rot that is present in UK politics right now is watching this government spend, I think over £100 billion on HS2, 16.5 billion on increased military spending, 27 billion on roads, and only 4 billion over several years on this new 10-point plan, which is not the way that I think an ordinary person who understands the reality would choose to divvy up the public spend right now. And so, yeah, I think there's a big question for us to be asking of what are we going to do about the fact that the people in power are driving us towards this future, which none of us want. And, it's Kate's speaking, other people speaking about things that are just normal things that people want. They just want a clean landscape and air and water for their children. They want a healthy future. They want access to food that doesn't poison them and that doesn't cost the earth in the production of it. It's just, we all just want quite normal stuff. And there are many, many systems and power structures and relations in place that are preventing people from making these changes, which I think lots of people will advocate for when they understand the reality of the circumstances that we're in.
But I think a lot of people obviously want a kind of beautiful earth that we are treating correctly, and a future where we don't have this major crisis ahead of us. But I suppose the question is, are we prepared to do what it takes. And also, ultimately, we live in this capitalist society, which is driven by the demand of the citizenry. People buy petrol cars, therefore they still exist. And people eat a lot of meat. That's why there's so many farms. Ultimately, it is the demand of us that is leading this to happen, just as much as it is anything else.
Can I jump in there? Because I think it's really important not to just source the demand coming from what people want. I think behind it is a financial system that funds big corporations that spend an awful lot of money on advertising for the last 100 years, convincing people, for example, that a hearty breakfast is eating sausages and bacon, and that's not good for you. But a lot of advertising went into that in the US. And a fascinating story, a man called Edward Bernays, he was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he realized that his uncle's psychotherapy could be turned into very lucrative retail therapy. And he turned it into what he called propaganda, what we call advertising. So there's a huge machine telling people what they want is a big, fancy, flashy car, and that they want to eat luxurious foods and luxurious meats. And that is partly what fuels the companies that make very large profits out of the lifestyles that we then are convinced to adopt. So I just want to be, just to recognize that it's not just this is what people want and therefore the demand is coming from the consumer. Actually, many, many people want to lead far healthier lives. They want to feel safe in their neighborhoods. They'd love to have their kids walking to school and not feel they're going to get polluted or in the danger of cars. And people want to connect again. So there are totally different business models. And I think actually you mentioned capitalism. I think it's really important to recognize that the laws that we have are the laws of the living planet. These are the laws by which we have to make our lives work. And we need to redesign our economies and redesign finance and take away the big word capitalism and say, hang on, nothing is fixed there. This system was created, the system of finance and the system of economy was totally created. It's a design and we can recreate it. And actually we have to recreate it so that the economy and finance is conducive to life, because right now it's not.
Claire, I mean, you've spent a lot of time trying to make people, I suppose, wake up, and you've dedicated huge amounts of hours to protesting and risked freedoms. Do you think people are listening to your message?
Yeah, I think they are, and I also think that we're sort of feel to be still quite some distance from the place where we need to be. So, I mean, a lot of things I think have been sometimes not celebrated so much by our movement when we've shifted conversations and hearts and minds, and we had, government saying that Parliament declaring that they believe we are in an emergency with the climate and the ecological emergency, and so things have seemed to shift, but the reality is, and you will have probably heard Antonio Guterres in the news today saying that, carbon emissions are still going up, despite the fact that we've closed down loads of parts of the global economy this year, totally abruptly and in a really damaging way. But people said to me at some points this year, oh, you must be glad because they've stopped the planes and they've shut down all the economy and people have stopped buying things and stuff. And, of course I'm not glad because it's causing immense human suffering. It's done in a totally not organised way. And it hasn't even had a big enough impact for us to say, oh, well, it's significantly reduced carbon emissions. It hasn't. We're doubling down, as people are saying, on carbon investments, and our government is doing that with the Bank of England as well, with all of the bailouts. And so it's the look at the interconnectedness of all of these things, the political economy, the monetary economy, and seeing how these systems, as Kate so inspiringly presents us with, the framework to think, well, this is just a design. It's just a thing we made up, and we could change all of it, and we could change it so that, first of all, it stops doing utterly stupid stuff and it starts to evolve into something that's capable of doing smarter stuff. And I guess, in terms of the sort of supply and demand conversation, my background's in fashion, and I can tell you nobody demanded that people drove down prices in fashion so low that we were producing excessive amounts of stuff that was so cheap people would wear it once and throw it away. Nobody ever demanded that. The industry drove itself to that place. And I do hold some of those industry leaders accountable for the fact that they knew they were driving a race to the bottom. And they've done it on purpose because they can make a lot of money out of it. But there comes a point where you can't exploit the land, the resources, all the human beings in your supply chains any harder. And you can't find anywhere cheaper to make things in a worse way in order to make yourself more and more money. And so it's just obvious that the system has got, the rules have got to change. And there are laws, as Kate said, in place that keep these things functioning the way that they do. And there are laws that are absent from our world, including things for applying for ecocide, which would make it a criminal offence to devastate living systems beyond repair. And the fact that we don't have those laws, but we do have laws in place to make sure that people maximise profit at a time like now, we have to look very seriously about why we have these rules and who they're serving. And they don't serve the majority of people. And the majority of people, I think, would be really, really pleased to see them change. But we have to open our hearts and our minds and our imaginations to be able to believe that those things can change. And I hope that, through continued acts of rebellion and civil disobedience, we're going to continue to see movements showing this kind of bold and fearless kind of courage and creativity, which hopefully does show that there are people who are willing to make enough of a personal sacrifice and a consistent, very, very loud noise about this stuff until things actually start to change. Not just the conversation changes, but the physical impacts that we're having on the planet begin to change.
Kate, just to bring you in, it has obviously been quite a year, of which we have adapted to quite radical change on a scale not really seen before. Does that present an opportunity? Do you think that obviously part of this is that whatever way you pull it, human life will have to change to some degree. We will have to change how we live in order to make sure we can have a sustainable future. Does coronavirus and the fact that we have adapted in some way, whether it's good is a different question, does that present an opportunity and hope that we can do what's needed?
Oh, it definitely does. Yes. Change doesn't happen in normal, quiet times. Change happens when times are disrupted. It's when cracks open up in history that you can pivot in a new direction. I'll just give an example, actually. I've been working with the city of Amsterdam, which was already embracing having a circular economy, and they're going to have no fossil fuel cars in the city by 2030, not just ending selling them, no cars in the city by 2030. And they've embraced the donut economics that I'm working with, which is a donut with a hole in the middle. It's leave no one falling short on the essentials of life in the whole, but don't overshoot the planet's pressure on the outside, so thriving in between. In the midst of COVID lockdown, in the height of Amsterdam's infection in April this year, they released their city donut report saying, here's how we're going to bring Amsterdam into the donut in a way that meets the needs of all our people in this city, that means this city is an ecologically thriving place, but also that respects the well-being of all people around the world, the people in those supply chains who are making our clothes and packing our food and digging the minerals and assembling our phones, and respects the impact on the whole planet, bringing our footprint back within planetary boundaries. They released that in the midst of COVID. Why? Well, they said, well, one, we have to carry on functioning as a government. We can't just delay everything until this crisis is over. And two, as we emerge from this emergency, who do we want to become? Where do we want to go? And we are using this as a compass for the direction we want to pivot in. All recoveries demand massive public packages. They open up an amazing opportunity, as we've seen, for unprecedented kinds of intervention and legislation, things you'd never have dreamed happened. Suddenly they're happening on Monday morning. And so what do we want to fill those opportunities with? It's so important to know that very, very significant changes are possible. We've just witnessed it. Let's not let that close up again and forget it. Let's use that openness, that pliability to transform. A very simple way that mayors are doing it is going out literally while the streets are dead quiet, painting a line on the street that says, and now actually this is no longer cars, this is bikes. And bam, you've transformed your city infrastructure and you've totally enabled a different kind of economy that was already waiting. The cyclists who really wanted to bike to work, but whose kids were pushed to the, really dangerously to the side by the cars, suddenly there's space for them. And that's a very visible making way for the new economy to emerge. Now we need to see that happening in business. Bring on social enterprise that has purpose at its heart. It's designed to deliver on purpose. It's social enterprises in this economy, in this country, that stepped in and pivoted to provide services, whether they're nursery services or care services. Enable them, because they are part of the future. They're key to the future of reinventing enterprise.
And Claire, what do you think, coming off the back of that, for example, making more bike lanes, what do you think is the best way to attack this as we come out of this coronavirus crisis? What can the UK government do in terms of kind of practical steps now to try and, alter our lives to the point that we are heading to a more sustainable future?
Well, I think my main concern here is that people need to understand the need for change. So part of our first demand of Tell the Truth was, that the government and all institutions should engage in mass public awareness and education work to make sure that people understand. So I think there's probably some stretch to go before people are really all very, very well aware of the need for the urgent change, because it's really important that citizens are up for this stuff, because I think most informed people would be really up for doing some quite radical things to try and change course.
What do you think those radical things would be, though? Just to give listeners a sense of what they could do and what might be needed once we head out of this.
Well, I mean, I think there's so much that needs to be done to the economy, which is why we've got this new Project Money Rebellion, which is seeking to bring that dialogue forward about the state of the economy and the political economy and the impact that it's having. But also, there's huge amount of employment that's possible just through stopping us from wasting so much stuff. And I know that, for example, many years ago, the Treasury shut down a programme which was brought to them as a proposal to retrofit and insulate people's homes and just stop wasting so much energy. So there's loads of that stuff to do, but also the kind of focus on democratic tools where really well-informed people sit around and deliberate and can speak then to the public about what they think is needed is what's necessary here. Because I think if you just run these things as a kind of referendum or something, you're not going to get the same result. But when you have a concentrated group of citizens who get highly educated on issues and they deliberate and then they tell the public, that's really, really powerful. So Citizens Assembly, I'm afraid, is still at the top of the list.
We just need to head to the news. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Claire and Kate. After the news...